Esta es en la Escuela Técnica ORT, en la oficina de dirección. Estamos entrevistando a... Acá tengo los datos. Norma Cohen, es hija de un inmigrante a Estados Unidos. Bueno, empieza la entrevista. Well, to begin the interview, could you introduce yourself for us?
I would be happy to. I'm Norma Cohn, and I'm chair of the 1999 mission of Women's American ORT to South America.
Well, tell us about your father's life in Europe. How was the place where he lived?
I'll tell you what I really think is important. And I think the most important thing that he lived with was anti-Semitism. His parents owned a butter and egg store, which would be like a grocery store. And when the war started, there was a Jewish star painted on their window. And other than the Jewish families, nobody would walk through the door into the store. As the Jewish families started to leave, my grandmother had seen two sons go into the army, the Russian army. Both were killed. My father was the youngest child, and she decided to take whatever money she had and to take him to the United States. She had a uncle that lived in Chicago, and that was their destination, to get to Chicago.
Your father was born in where was he born?
My father was born in Bialystok. He always said he was born in Russia, and I believe when he was born it was Russia, and then it reverted to Poland by the time I think he was about 10 or 12 years old.
So what he was doing there in Europe before coming here, he was studying.
He was a student. He happened to be a very bright man. He left. You could only attend school until I think it was 12th grade. And he then left and went to live with a sister in Germany and finished his education in Germany. Something that I think is very important to tell you. When my father was 8 years old, he was on the soccer team of his school, so he was a very good athlete. He was chased on his way home from school by a policeman waving a stick. The policeman hit my father on the legs, and although he wasn't injured, he did not walk for a year. My grandmother used to take him around in a wagon. And when we talked about this many years later, and my father was very well educated, and a very dear friend of his was a psychologist, and discussed with him the fact that the trauma of the policeman hitting him on the legs was what prevented him from walking. After about a year, the trauma must have faded, and he again could walk. And he was hit because he was coming home from Hebrew school, and he had his books with him, and for some reason the policeman took off after him. So he knew tremendous anti-Semitism in his life.
Remember your project, your games, your hobbies?
My father? My father? Yeah. My father. My father was a soccer player. He loved sports. He was a very strong man. When he came to the United States, when he attended English, when he went to school to take English, and then he went on to Crane Junior College and came out with a law degree. While he was going to school, he worked as on a pop truck. He lifted the cases because although he was educated, he could not speak the language, so he had to do manual labor. I kind of will jump ahead and tell you that my father ended up owning that pop company. and is a true American success story.
In Europe, who took the decision of leaving? Who made the political decision of say we're leaving?
By that time, his father had passed away. His mother decided, after losing the two sons, that she would take him and immigrate to America.
And when was that? And how did they do? Did they do any papers? How was the procedure to do that?
They were fortunate having my uncle in the States, and they knew quite a few people. They were able to get their immigration papers and came across, and were fortunate enough, as I said before, not to have to go steerage, but were able to go inland directly in New York. They did not stop in Ellis Island.
So well, who did he travel with in the ship? How was the trip? Did he ever tell you?
He did. He told us the people they met on the ship. There was another family whose last name was Muchman that were also coming to America. He became his closest friend. The mother of this young man that became my dad's good friend died on the ship coming over to America. She had consumption and became very ill and didn't make the trip. When they landed in America, my grandmother took this young man and my father, and they lived very close to each other all their lives. He became my uncle.
Do you know why he came to the United States?
He always said he came not to serve in the military. That, I believe, was a small part of it. I think if you look back at what they faced being Jewish in Bialystok, I think you realize why so many families left at that time. There was freedom in the United States. You could be Jewish and nobody ran after you, nobody painted a star on your window. And I think it really was for religious freedom.
In that time, did he have the choice of going to another country instead of the United States? Did he have any other place to go?
I think in order to immigrate, you had to have somebody that would accept the responsibility for you. And because my grandmother had an uncle here that was willing to sign the papers that they would not go on public aid, that he would take care of them, that opened the door to let them into the United States. I don't think they ever thought of going anyplace other than the United States.
What was his first impression of the country? What he first saw and impressed him?
When they landed in New York, until they took the train to Chicago, I think they spent several days in New York, and all I remember, he must have been on the east side, because I remember the story that he told of he'd never seen so many people in the apartment buildings, and people with clothes hanging out on their balconies, and people selling food in the street, the vendors. He was absolutely amazed. The wonderful thing about landing in New York was that there were so many immigrants. They felt very much at home because they all spoke his language. He really thought it was not going to be difficult until he arrived in Chicago and realized how few people spoke either Russian or German, and how difficult it would be for him.
What procedures did he have to make to enter the United States? And if he had any help, tell us how.
Evidently, they needed their visas and passports to immigrate. He never spoke of that, so I don't think that was the problem. The problem was getting somebody to sign for you that you could come into the States. That was the biggest problem.
He was when he arrived, he stayed in your aunt's house, isn't that in his aunt's house? So did he think he was staying forever in the United States, or he ever thought he could maybe someday return to Europe?
That's very interesting, because he was very successful. Yes, he came here, he stayed with his uncle, with my grandmother. She lived there all her life with her uncle. Her uncle, my grandmother was married to a cousin, he died. She was married to an uncle, he died. She came to the United States, lived with the uncle, they were married. She never changed her maiden name. She only married relatives, which was not unusual for Europe. So she married the uncle and stayed with him. The problem my father faced was, of course, the English problem, because here he was well educated and couldn't get a job until he learned English. As I mentioned before, he was very successful, and I always asked the question, did he not want to return home? Did he not want to visit his father's grave? Did he not want to see his brother's graves? And it was his feeling that you don't look back in life, that you only look forward. And I think that's truly an immigrant's feeling. I think my generation, your generation, we would not hesitate to go any place in this world to visit and to see. As you see, we're all here. But their generation really, once they were in the United States, did not leave to return home.
Well, so he learned English in the school. He went to junior school there in the United States. And did he make establish relationships with people of the community there, with more Jewish people or people from the same place of Europe that he had came for?
That's very interesting. I think typical of an immigrant's mentality, his friends, his closest friends were people like himself, other immigrants. Even though my mother was also an immigrant, she totally assimilated into the Jewish community. I never felt that my father did. Even though he was president of the synagogue, he did wonderful things, but he seemed to stay to himself. He always, I believe, felt that he was an outsider.
Well, talking a little about the family and friendship there. Did some part of the family stay in Europe, or no? There wasn't any, and he kept contact with the people in Europe.
He had a sister that moved to Paris that kept in close contact with. He had two nieces. In fact, as she became elderly and ill, I remember him sending money monthly to take care of the sister that is in Paris. The sister that moved to Sao Paulo's daughter married an Israeli, and they all moved to Israel. And my father did go to Israel once to see them and their family.
How was his family like in the United States? I mean, your family too.
Very interesting. I always felt that I was the child of an immigrant. Even though I looked like everybody else, I lived very comfortably. We had a beautiful home. I went to college, whatever I wanted. I went to school to become a teacher, and I think I did that because when I was young and I would come home, even from kindergarten and first grade, I would teach my parents. We would go over my papers, my spelling, my arithmetic. I would teach them what I had learned that day in school. It's something you carry with you your whole life. I don't think anyone other than children of immigrants feel that it's truly a weight on your shoulders. It's a good weight, but you never lose it.
How are the houses in which you lived in the United States while your father, when he arrived, in United States, how was the city? Was it all that like now, or it was what are the differences between the attitude of the people, everything?
They moved in with the uncle, and they lived in a lovely home. The neighborhood that they lived in has since deteriorated, like many cities. My parents, when they were married, moved to a lovely neighborhood on the border of Chicago, which was called Lincolnwood, which is a lovely suburb. And we lived there my whole life, and it was a beautiful home. I would venture to say that in that community there were very few immigrants. And once again, I think my mother was comfortable. I don't think my father was ever comfortable. He was much happier living in the city with his landsman.
And what were the food you? But he did often. He ate. So he kept on eating the same things that he ate in Europe, and he accustomed to the new foods in America.
They're bringing up a lot of memories. I would come home from school as a child, and my grandmother would be rendering chicken fat. And they would put onions in it, and it was spread on rye bread. And I remember my mother yelling, "Oh, it's so terrible for you. It's only fat. You're eating fat." But he loved it. He loved Jewish food. My mother did not cook Russian food. So once he left my grandmother and once my grandmother passed away, we did not eat much. My mother used to make borscht. That was probably the only thing that she kept.
What activities were made in the family?
My father worked probably days and nights. I only remember him working. I remember in the summers we used to go to the country. We would have a cottage with my mother's family. He would come out probably Saturday evening and return home Monday morning. He would only take one day off. He worked very, very hard his whole life. I think work was his life. I don't think he really ever found himself. He was very comfortable at work, and that's where he spent most of his time. He would come home in the evening. He would read the newspaper. He would play cards with friends. He would go into the city and play cards with his friends. We would occasionally have a family picnic, but I truly only remember him working.
And in America, were there special days, the Jewish holidays? They made special food for that days. And what did you like respect that the Jewish holidays?
We did on Yom Kippur. My parents would fast. For Rosh Hashanah, we would have, my mother would roast chicken. Every once in a while, she would make a kugel. Yes, there were Jewish foods. Not all year long, but for the holidays, she would prepare special things.
And how was the education in America of your father? How much did he last to learn the English? And what did he tell you he remembered about his teachers? How was it?
I think it was very good. I think when he arrived in Chicago, it wasn't an overabundance of immigrants, so there was a program set up that he did attend. I think the schooling was very good. When he went to law school at the junior college, at that time he only needed 2 years for a law degree, it was excellent. I do remember him talking about a teacher that was Russian, and I think that teacher really got him through. I think he made sure that he knew what to write on his tests and so forth. So I think it was a very good experience for him. And
what things did they teach him in at school. There were that things. Did that things help him in life then? What he learned at school.
I think everything you learn in school helps you in life. Yes, I think he would have answered that question, yes. I think the discipline, I think the friends that you make, in addition to what you're being taught, lasts you your entire lifetime. He had one friend who went to Crane Junior College with him. In fact, he gave the memorial at my father's funeral and talked about the fact that they had gone to school together.
So the relationship with his classmates was good. He didn't have any problem being an immigrant in the States.
Yes, I think he did. I think the few friends that he made probably were immigrants like himself. They tended to stay together. I don't think he really branched out. Acquaintances maybe, but his good friends were all immigrants. Funny, I never thought of that until now.
How did he feel in American holidays? Was he comfortable?
Like the 4th of July, like, regular American. I don't think he felt much. He loved America. It presented him with wonderful opportunities. It gave him a home. It embraced him. Did he feel American? I really don't think he did. I think he always thought like an immigrant. I think there was an insecurity by not having family. He knew that he could only depend upon himself. I remember always saving for a rainy day. That was a big thing in our family because you didn't have anybody to go to. It isn't like our families now that you have brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles that if something should happen, illness, you could go to them. They never felt that way. They always had to take care of themselves.
Did he ever go to some institution, to an educative institution that was linked to the collectivity? To an institution that was linked or had a relation with the collectivity he belonged?
The community that he was in?
With the Jewish community or some institution?
No, I don't believe. I think moving to the neighborhood that we did help form the synagogue, and he was active at the synagogue. But in terms of his attending, he was bar mitzvahed in Russia. He remembered that. He remembered his portion. He loved going to school with us, to Jewish school. When the grandchildren were bar mitzvahed, he could read and speak, and that gave him tremendous pride. Yes, being Jewish gave him pride.
He went to a Jewish school, or you went to a Jewish school? He sent you to a Jewish school. Okay. So the language, we already talked about that. And how was your education? Let's see, the education of his daughter. What kind of education could he offer you? How was it?
Education was the first and foremost thing in our family. Both my sister and I, you had to go to college. It was not a question of if you wanted to, what college were you going to go to. We both studied education. Education was very important. Family was very important. I think because he had no family, my sister and I really were his whole world, and our children, our families, our husbands, that he loved being around the grandchildren.
Was your education very different to the one he had in Russia?
I went to a public school that I walked to every day. I went to a high school. Our neighborhood probably was very Jewish. I went to Sunday school. I went to Hebrew. I had a good Jewish education. I went to summer camp at a Jewish camp. But those things were my choices. When you are the child of an immigrant, you make a lot of choices yourself. You cannot go to your parents because they had no experience with the things that you had to choose. And you become, you just do. You become mature very early because you do have to make decisions that you know will affect you the rest of your life.
Did your father nationalized as an American? Did he change his nation to America? Why you think he did that?
They all did. My mother did. They all went to classes. They all were naturalized. It was a place they lived in, and they wanted their children to feel that they were Americans.
Well, I don't want to. Well, if you have something else to say, we haven't asked you. Please, you can tell us. Any conclusion about this?
I'll deviate for a minute and just say that this experience, visiting your school, meeting all of you, this project that you have undertaken, I think is absolutely remarkable, and I've just been so pleased to be a part of it. I thank all of you.
Well, thank you, and well, thank you very much for the information and everything. Hoy es 27 de abril de 1999, una entrevista en el Colegio ORT. El nombre del entrevistado es Myron S. Dunay, inmigrante a Estados Unidos. Bueno, empezamos.
Could you introduce yourself? Name, last name, when were you born?
My name is Myron S. Dunay, although my friends call me Mike. I was born in New York, New York, on August 19th, 1934. I was the son of immigrants. Both my father and mother were immigrants to this country.
Did they come together as immigrants? They live together in Europe yet?
No, they did not. My mother came a year before from Vilna in Lithuania, and my father came from Lvov, which was originally part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But after World War I, the empire was broken up into different countries. And then it became, where my father was living, became part of Poland. And one of the reasons why he wanted to leave was because the leader of Poland, his name was Marshal Pilsudski, was drafting young men into the army, and my father did not want to serve as a soldier. But my father met my mother in Boston, Massachusetts in 1926. He came to visit a cousin during Passover, Pesach, and my mother lived upstairs. It was in a house, two families. My mother lived upstairs with her mother and with some other family members. And my father came to visit his cousin, and the cousin said, there are three very beautiful young women upstairs. The mother is a widow. They're, of course, Jewish women. Two of the girls already have boyfriends, so forget about it. Very strong guys. But the third one, Emma, has no boyfriend. She had a boyfriend, but her mother didn't like the boyfriend. Her mother thinks
trip or your father?
I'll tell you.
Alright. So how was your father's life in Europe? What age was he? What did he do? How was the family composed?
In Europe, my father was the son of a grain merchant. They were not super rich, but they were fairly well off. My father's father used to buy grain from the farmers, Polish and Ukrainian farmers, who would raise barley, wheat, oats. And my father's father then would buy them and put them in trains and ship them all over Central Europe. And my father's father was a religious man. He was a religious, traditional Jew. And that's the way my father was raised, to study Torah. But he also helped his father. When the first war came, my father was too young to be a soldier. He helped his father. And there was some money that they had saved. That was all the life savings. They didn't put it in banks because of the war. They were afraid. And so my grandfather gave my father, he was like 17 years old, he gave him the gold that represented their life savings. Everything was converted from the currency of the Austro-Hungarian Empire into gold. And he told my father to go to Vienna, the capital of the empire, and try to save the money, put the money in hiding somehow. And when I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm mistaken. My father was to take the money, the Polish money, which was called thalers, and he was to convert it into gold. That's what he was to do. But when my father got to Vienna, the war was over and the Austrian money was worthless. It had no value. So he had nothing, so he came back home to his father.
They lost everything. Oh. And how was the place which he lived in? And how was the family composed? He had mother, father, brothers.
The town was a very small town, about 6,000 people. Half were Jews, half were not Jews, were non-Jews. It was separated by a small river, a narrow river, and a bridge. And the Jews, most of them lived on one side of the water, of the bridge, and the Gentiles on the other. But they got along fine. And my father was the oldest son. He had a sister who had come to America, who had come to the United States about 10 years before, and before the war began. And then my father had two sisters who were younger, and then there were two brothers who were younger than they. My father's mother died during the war. What happened was she was a nurse, a volunteer nurse, and she tried to nurse some people back to health. Some of the women got cholera or typhus, some of these terrible diseases, and she risked her life to take care of them, and then she contracted these diseases and she died. So when she died, she left 5 children. My father, who was already about 17 at the end of the war, 17 or 18, his 2 sisters, and then 2 brothers. I never knew that my father had brothers or sisters, never. I knew he had the one sister who had come to the United States, Aunt Tama. I knew her. But my father never spoke of his brothers and sisters, and I know why. It was because when I was a little boy, the Second War was going on, and he probably thought that his family had died as a result of the war, because they were in Poland, and when the war began, well, just before the war, Germany and Russia divided the country of Poland in half. Germany took the western part of what was Poland, and the Russians took the eastern. And then Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, and the Polish army only lasted like 3 or 4 weeks, and they were destroyed. They couldn't compete. But my father never told me. I didn't know that I had these uncles and aunts. Now, the 2 aunts were killed by Hitler. One sister and her family were taken off a train. They had little babies, and the Gestapo shot them right there, right in the street, right on the train station. But the brothers went first with the Polish army to fight as soldiers, and then when the army was defeated, they went over to the Russian army when Poland was defeated, and they fought with the Russians. And after the war, one of them came to the United States, the other one went to Paris, France. He married a woman from Paris, France, and he lives in Paris, France even now. I see him every other year. My father, some were all Hebrew, some were translated in English, and he would study. He would also study like the commentaries like Rashi and Rambam, but mostly but his specialty was the 5 books of Moses, the Chamisha, the 5 books, you know, I mean, of 64 compete in the World Bible Contests. It used to be held every 4 or 5 years in Yerushalayim in Israel. And all his life when he came to the United States, he worked hard labor. He went ahead, but he was very smart. He took first a written examination. The written examinations were held in universities in different parts of the United States. And he went to a college that was near us called United States that then went for the oral examination. World's Fair Hall of Education. They had television, but not so popular in 1964. But it was on the radio. It was covered on the radio, and my father won the second prize. So the winner was a man who taught. It was open to non-Jews as well as Jews. And this man taught at a Presbyterian, it's like a Protestant university. He taught Bible studies. And then my father and then some other person was in 3rd place. So my father was always very, very proud of that.
Remember his games, his hobbies, his projects?
In Europe, I liked sports, and I played many sports. My father didn't seem to care. He wasn't interested in sports until he became very, very old. And I would visit him. He was in a home for the old people, and he would watch television, and then he would watch the football. And he was a little interested. When I asked him, I said, Dad, in sports. Thanks to his father. He very much appreciated his father for all the help he received.
Do you know if he had another choice apart from coming to the United States? I mean, another place to go?
Frankly, I don't know. I know there were immigrants to South America at that time, but there may be one reason why he decided to come here beyond what I've told you. His grandfather came to the United States in 1870, stayed for a while. My father's father was already alive. He was a little boy. My great-grandfather had 2 children. He was married, had 2 children. He was about 25 years old or 26. He heard you could make a lot of money in America, so he came. It was after our Civil War, and he worked, but he stayed in the United States maybe 5 years. He would save up some money and then invested in different projects and lose that. And then he came home. But when he came home, he eventually he became old, and he moved in. He lost his wife. He was alone, and he moved in with my grandfather and his wife, my grandmother. And my father was a little boy, and he shared a room with his grandfather, my great-grandfather, and he used to tell him stories about America. So I think that might have been, I remember stories about the United States. So that might have been one of the reasons why he wanted to come. It might have been an influence on him, right?
Yes. But during the trip, he was alone during the trip.
He was alone.
Didn't he know anybody?
He knew nothing no one on the boat, I'm sure.
No one on the boat. And so what was his first impression when he arrived to the United States? The first thing that called his attention.
I really don't know. I don't remember discussing that with him. But he was met at the dock, at the boat, by his uncle and his aunt.
And what papers did he do to stay in the country? Did he naturalize?
Oh, he became a citizen. He naturalized eventually. It took some years.
It took some years. Did he receive any help from someone to settle down in the United States?
Well, I think initially he stayed with his aunt and uncle probably a few weeks, and then the aunt and uncle said, "It's time for you to get a job." So he went to work almost immediately.
He wants to live alone.
I don't know when it was that he went to live alone, but eventually he did live alone. He told me one interesting story. After he was in New York for about a year, he heard about Chicago and opportunities in the city of Chicago, which is very far away. He took a train and went to Chicago, and he was there about a year. He worked there for about a year. It was an interesting story, I thought, because he didn't tell me about it until he was much older. Because I said to him, he mentioned he had been to Chicago. I said, "Well, what did you do in Chicago?" And he told me.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Your we watch,
Yes.
then we go down. You must go down.
You want me to go down now? Okay.
We are everyone.
We're leaving.
In the titles we.
Adios. We will finish this interview, I'm sure, next
Yes.
time I'm here.
Next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the information.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, but
It was a pleasure.
you must.
Was here, and you could see like a scar, and he chased after the man. He ran after the man. The man dropped a gun, and my father chased him for several hundred meters, and then finally my father collapsed because he was losing blood, and they caught this man. And my father had an old newspaper article from the local paper that said, the headline said, it was yellow. It had turned from age, but it said, "Brave young man foils holdup."
Wait for a second.